Ata Māria, everybody. No mai, haere mai, ko Joy Keane, toka ingoa. Hello, welcome. My name is Joy Keane and I'm the Executive Director at the New Zealand Game Developers Association. It is my extreme pleasure to be hosting the launch of NZ Plays, and I am excited for all of you to learn the results of the study and discover what those findings mean for the game development industry in New Zealand. The Interactive Games and Entertainment Association, or IGEA as we lovingly refer to them as, has been a long-time partner of NZGDA, and I have enjoyed working with them since starting with NZGDA earlier this year. While based in Australia, IGEA also advocates for the industry in New Zealand. The study that has been undertaken to produce today's report is the 14th annual report produced on the state of New Zealand video game industry. Gosh, that's a lot of words. This runs in parallel with the same study and reports on the video game industry in each of the states of Australia. I think Professor Jeff Brand, who will be presenting shortly, really likes undertaking a huge amount of mahi. Before we kick off, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Minister Anderson, who is in the audience today. Also, our Australian visitors that have come across the ditch. I'd just like to assure you that Wellington weather is always beautiful and it's only ever a little bit windy. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to all the New Zealanders in the room, and I welcome you to Takina. This is a jewel in the crown of the Wellington's event space, and we are all very proud of it. I hope you enjoy it too. So, to kick off, I will now hand over to Ron Curry, who is the CEO of IGEA, and he will introduce Jeff. Ron.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction and for the amazing venue that we're in today. I'm Ron Curry. I'm the CEO of IGEA, where I've been CEO for a long time, and prior to that, I've been working in the industry for about close to 30 years now, and most of that time has been working between Australia and New Zealand. So I have a real connection over here. Joy's right, we've enjoyed a great relationship with the NZGDA for many years, and our two associations work very closely together to ensure that the media, policymakers, politicians, bureaucrats, regulators understand our industry and understand what it's about. Jeff's going to go through a whole bunch of data with you soon and talking about games, and I'm not going to steal too much of his thunder by giving away some of the secrets here. But what I want to say is, for those who have joined us before, this used to be called Digital New Zealand. And after the last presentation, we had a little bit of think about, is that really representative of what we're trying to say? And we had a real think about video games and what they represent. And I think for a long time, particularly when we talk to policymakers and regulators, we tend to be a little bit apologetic about our industry. We say that, it's great for the economy and it's great for jobs and we use it in healthcare and it's great for industry. And sometimes we shy away from saying it's just fun. That the fact that people play in and of itself is a good enough reason to be in industry. We know that we learn through play, that we create community through play, and that we bond through play. So I guess our change in name is paying homage to that and saying that it's okay to have fun. It's okay to enjoy yourself simply by enjoying the joy of playing games. And everything else that spills outside of it is a huge bonus. It is a bonus for the economy, it's a bonus for jobs, it's a bonus for many things. But at the end of the day, New Zealand plays. So I'd like to welcome Jeff Brand to take you through some of the data.
Thank you, Ron.
Mention Minister Anderson.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. What a stunning space. It's so lovely to be back in Wellington. Joy, I don't know what you were talking about with the weather. It's just beautiful here, but I grew up in the snow, so I'm going to say that, aren't I? Minister Anderson, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to also have you here and a real honor. And ladies and gentlemen, when I was a little boy, this is not going to be the length of the talk, my life story, but when I was a little boy, I played with a device called a Merlin. Merlin was an electronic device that had 9 games in it. I'm just going to move this down because as an expat American, I tend to be a bit noisy. Merlin was a little red device, looked like a brick phone. Have any of you, I'm the oldest person in the room, I'm pretty sure, but have any of you seen that device, Merlin? Good on you. All right, so little touch screens, dots, and you could play 9 games. It was very basic. Barreling down the motorway, no seatbelts back then, of course. Playing on this game made drives wonderful, and it was fun. It created joy on long journeys, and it was something that I could really engage with. The games that we're talking about today are so much more, sort of robust, and this is not working, so I'll just click into here. Hang on. Aha. So much more robust and so much more detailed, even the simple ones that people play on their mobile phones or on websites. As we've said, New Zealand Plays is part of a whole suite of studies. I'm going to talk about the 8 that are just specifically in this package, but there are many others. And this series of reports has been a powerful panel study design that has been supported by IGEA for the past 13 years. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done and my colleagues at Bond University have done. So there are the report covers. We've tried blue, we've tried green, and now we're going for gold. And we've tried different sizes, but all of these reports do one thing. They tell us about the trajectory of New Zealanders and how they play. The report is a big project, as Joy said, and really I'm the small player in the piece to some degree. I've got an amazing team of colleagues at Bond University, a couple of former PhD students who have now completed, which is great, and one who's on the way, and art by Mike Morfitt, but Raylene Knowles at IGEA is the executive producer of this and really makes sure that we meet the deadlines and get the report to you, which is great. Let me talk a little bit about the methodology. So this is 800 plus New Zealand households. We make sure, and we use a panel through Qualtrics, we make sure we reach all of the regions of New Zealand, and we try to get all of these households to tell us about people who play in them and all of the demographics of these New Zealanders in these homes. So at the end of the day, we've got quite a large sample of almost 2,000 people and a margin of error of 3.5%. So this is panel style research. It's big. It's like doing national research in the wild. We have infographics in the report, which you can now download from the IGEA.net website. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but they tell you some really powerful stories about who plays and why they play video games in New Zealand. Lots of takeaway key findings for you to unpack. And finally, lots of interactive content in the interactive PD, so you can go to the bits that you're interested in. Why do we do this research? Well, for many years we've wanted to understand in Oceania broadly, New Zealand specifically, why do people play video games? Who plays video games? Are they still males under the age of 20 in dark bedrooms? No. Okay, so we'll get back to that. But that was one of the reasons for doing this research. I know there are folks from classification here. Are we classifying games for the audience that plays them? Probably. Does everybody understand classification? Maybe not. Maybe so. But what we wanted to do with this research is just have a conversation about this medium, which is just like every other medium, except that we can interact with it in a way that we can't with television and film or even books or radio or hi-fi. So this is about playing video games and what that means for New Zealand. And we think that video games serve a lot of purposes and mean different things to many different people. Each one of you has a different origin story. Your origin story probably didn't start with a Merlin or even Atari 2600. It probably started with something like a GameCube, right? Or an Xbox. But now, of course, with mobile phones everywhere, post-pandemic, which I'm going to talk about, we know that video games actually are doing so many things for so many people. So we ask in the survey, every single time we do it, for people to tell us their own story. And wow, New Zealanders have a lot to say about playing video games. Every time we do this research, I used to think, oh, well, no one wants to type in an answer on the web survey to tell us their own personal story. Well, guess what? New Zealanders, every single time we do the research, tell us more and more and more. They have more to say. And post-pandemic, a lot of people have a lot to say. So one of the things I just want to draw out really quickly are these quotes, right? So these are pretty powerful statements about people's personal experiences. And I want to read them out for audio and camera, but also in case you can't see it in the back or you have a vision impairment. So it's an opportunity to experience things, travel, sports, etc., for free or for almost nothing. As a teen, I learned a lot about history and other cultures through games. All right, so not just reading books about history or watching YouTubes about history, but also just playing video games and attracting knowledge about history. So this is a mum, 38, from the Auckland region. Video games allow you to roam freely and in turn help you to find meaning and enjoyment, which boosts your self-confidence. Male, age 30, from Bay of Plenty region. So this is about a personal enhancement, a capability, a growth model for somebody who may lack confidence or may lack experience and wants to gain new capabilities. And so this last one, so this is a 76-year-old from Auckland region. I like to win. Who doesn't? And I'm very competitive with my teenage grandson, who also likes to win. Wouldn't that be a great dynamic in that home to engage with one another through play and compete and laugh about it and really push each other? And for a 76-year-old, being pushed is really important, right? For that neuroplasticity and growth. Apart from that, she says, it is good for me to relax while I am improving. These are incredible stories. And so through the report, there are lots of these. So what is the state of video games in New Zealand today? Well, when we started this research way back in 2010, 88% of New Zealand households, already at that time quite a large proportion, had a game device on which somebody in the household played video games. It's 94% today. And what you can see there is probably a little blip due to sampling error, because again, the margin of error is 3.5%. But what we know is that there is, if I were to draw a line from 88 to 94%, there is this sort of steady slanted growth towards ubiquity or widespread use in every single home in New Zealand of video games. Fun fact, if you're in a Maori household in New Zealand today, you have 100%, you have a device on which somebody in your household plays video games. That's astounding, right? So of the 18% of the sample who identified as Maori, we know that they're all playing video games. Over half of them are parents, which explains that, and I'll come back to that point. How about the proportion of New Zealanders who play video games? Well, it's gone up from 73% when we were here talking about this research 2 years ago. Well, actually, 2 years ago, of course, we were online. And 4 years ago, we were here, and it was below 70%. So we're seeing this nice steady growth of the proportion of New Zealanders who play video games. Just for clarity, that's 4 out of 5. That's dominant. That's a mainstream medium. The average age of the average number of years that a New Zealander has been playing video games is 11. It's dropped a little bit because we've got a lot of newbies who've come on stream. And we'll come back to what they're playing on and what they like to play. So the devices that people use in their homes, well, it turns out that the vast majority of New Zealand households, right, have more than one device on which video games are played. Okay, so we know 94% of New Zealand households have a device on which video games are played by somebody in the home, and of those, 80% have 2 or more devices. And no great big surprise, the smartphone is the dominant device in New Zealand households for games, followed by consoles and PCs. When we started this research in 2010, PCs well and truly dominated the chart. So there's been a real shift, obviously, in technology, and we'll come back to that again related to the pandemic, but more people have access to more technologies on which to play video games. And just remember, you can download this report and all of these graphs from igea.net if I go too fast. The average age of a New Zealander who plays video games today is 35. 2 years ago when we reported it, it was 35. 4 years ago, it was 34. If you go back to 2010, the average age was 32. 2 things are real. 1, New Zealanders are aging. We know that as a population. Number 2, we know that many more older New Zealanders are playing video games, and I'm going to come back to that statistic. But what we see is basically every 4 years, we jump up another year in age of the average age of video game players in New Zealand. That's astounding to me. So let's break these down into more, I suppose, focused categories. First of all, look at the gender mix. 48% of all video game players in New Zealand are female. All right, we know that more than 50% of the New Zealand population is female, so we're almost at saturation, and we're going to look at those numbers in a little bit more detail in a moment. What about age? Well, if you're 1 to 17, 77% chance that you are playing video games. 77% of 1 to 17-year-olds now play video games. Why is that so low compared to 18 to 64-year-olds? Well, it's a joke I often tell, and it gets a laugh, so I'm going to try it again. It's the 1 and 2-year-olds that are letting us down. We just have to work on their development a little bit more quickly. But 77%, 1 to 17 play, but this is probably the big surprising story. 64% of people the age 65 and over in New Zealand play video games. Were you aware of this? Are you surprised by it, right? We'll drill down. So of all the New Zealanders who play video games, 70% are working age adults. 9% are over the age of 65, and 21% are children, by definition, children and teenagers. So again, the vast majority of New Zealanders who play video games are working age adults. Let's drill down a little bit further into different age groups. The most surprising thing that you see here is how flat that is. If the stereotype that we have often held around video games just held, we would have this huge skewed distribution with a really long tail going all the way down here that would be very thin. But that's not what we're seeing. What we do see is there are a lot of people, again, in working age years who play video games. Don't be fooled by the 85 to 94-year-olds. They're not powering on as super gamers. It's a very small, just a few people in the sample, right? But those few people are playing video games, quite a bit of them. And of course, neuroplasticity being what it is, it's really important for us to engage in challenging play behavior. As Ron said, play has just been so important to us culturally. And if we look at the cultural history of New Zealand, play has been absolutely essential. So no great big surprise that we have older adults wanting to play. And look at some of these stories. Now this could be, you could read this as board or table-based games, but these are also digital because we checked this, and we'll see this a little bit later. So I do jigsaw puzzles, trivia quizzes, and crossword puzzles to help keep my mind and brain active as I get older. Wordle counts here, right? So does Words with Friends, and so does chess, and so do things like Sudoku. I also get depressed, and playing games helps me rise up and feel happier. Just dwell on that for a second. I get depressed, so I play video games, and what happens? I rise up and feel happier. So I'm activated to actually rise up and conquer that depression. How about this one? Playing games allows me to escape the stress and crazy of day-to-day life. Spend time with friends online and have fun. So this is a father, age 37, who's still engaged with mates, still engaged with his kids, still engaged with play. Fantastic, right, from the Waikato region. And finally, this 21-year-old. It's a fun thing to do with my partner. It makes us work together. I'm going to show you a stat in here which kind of surprises me, but geez, husbands and wives, partners, they're playing a lot more than we thought. And they're playing a lot more together than with their kids because now all adults play video games, or most adults. Now, over the years, we've talked about what parents do and how they use games to help them parent. The numbers are in the report. I just want to look at these stories. So here's a 39-year-old mom, right? She says, I play for the fun bonding time I have with my son. It is his smile when I play with him. For the parents in the room, you know that reading books to your kids is really fantastic, and they love that, and they love that time sitting right next to you. But we often forget that, particularly as our children get past those years 1, 2, and 3 when they're not playing, and they start to discover screen media, they really want you to join them if you're a mom. They want you to join them if you're a dad. They want to keep the engagement going, and this mom certainly says that. And I love this. I feel video games are important for kids' mental fitness and to increase their concentration. I don't know what this father is smoking in Canterbury region, but if you ask the media, That's not what happens with video games. It's the opposite, right? Concentration, are you kidding? I thought it made them concentrate less. But every single one of you who has been on an epic campaign knows that you have to concentrate. If you're doing a strategy game, if you're working on a puzzle, you have to focus. We know that. And I love this idea that mental fitness is a part of a child's development when playing video games. And indeed, you know, cognitive alacrity, cognitive flexibility is just so important, not only as we age, but actually when we're young too, and video games really provide that in my view. We ask New Zealanders, where do they rank video games amongst all media? We simplified the question this year to save time because, again, when people are typing in answers on a survey, it takes more time. We wanted to shorten it. I'm sorry that we did because it created basically a fairly asymptotic or, very equal set of outcomes for different media. So you've got TV and social media, #1 in New Zealand. And I think a lot of parents in the past, we've demonstrated parents are really concerned about social media, particularly compared to other media. Then we have music, movies, games, and YouTube. We took out 2 media, YouTube and Twitch, just to test something. And basically what we find is they're all popular at a sort of YouTube, games, movies, and music at #2. Ranked #3 are effectively legacy media, and then Twitch is just down there by itself because it's a small piece of the puzzle. All right. How about why we play video games in New Zealand? Well, #1 reason, obviously, is to have fun. And that goes back to Ron's point in our, I think, evolution in talking about video games. We wanted to say that video games do more than just allow us to have fun. And we've demonstrated that over time. These reasons for playing video games, let me zoom in, to pass time, to relax and de-stress, to escape, to be challenged, for a sense of accomplishment and for mental health. This is out of a line of research called uses and gratifications. In media, we try to understand why do people use media and what do they get out of media. Well, #1 reason, obviously, 99% say, I just want to have fun. But to pass time and to be relaxed are hugely popular reasons. We gave New Zealanders the opportunity to say, tell us if any of these apply. And look at across the board, 94% to escape, 94% to be challenged. And for mental stimulation, 87%. That's huge, right? So we play for a variety of different reasons. Let's go back to the lonely teenager in the bedroom. The common playing experience is social. If I ask New Zealanders, which I did, tell us all of the different ways you play video games with other people, right? And just look at that 6% playing with other relatives. That includes grandparents in there, right? So all the ways you play video games. And then I say, do you not play video games with any of these people? 20% say they play solo. 4 out of 5 play with other people. So 21% versus 79%, 4 out of 5 play socially, and they're meeting people through games. They're building friendships through games. I've watched, I'm a father of 3 now adult sons, the youngest is 20. We've played games throughout their development. Fun story, my middle son once took a Pokemon game and said, Dad, what does this say? And I said, mate, you're gonna have to learn to read. He's now, and then not because I think of Pokemon, but he is an avid reader. He's also a teacher, right? So it's great to see that games can be part of that social development. We played all the time together. This last Christmas, how many of you remember a game called Cell Damage for the GameCube? Do any of you remember this game? Right, great. 2 of us in the room have played this game. So I played this with my sons. They played it cooperatively. It's meant to be a multiplayer with the 4 controllers in the front of a GameCube. You're going around trying to win a race, which was a crazy race with different ways of taking out the other racers. My 3 sons played that game cooperatively. They'd talk to each other, mate, go around the back, and they would beat the AI in the game, which was very rudimentary back then, by playing cooperatively. They discovered that you play together, you play socially, you win. And I think that's the story about video games today. They are so social. But I said before, I'm going to talk to you about playing with a partner or spouse. Of the people in your home, you're most likely to play with your partner. How cool is that, right? Now in my home, I'm competitive, my wife is competitive, we've played many games together and we compare scores on games all the time, but it's a source of joy. And some debate, like I don't see you're working out with Wordle, that's a big one. And playing with a friend, 17%. Playing with children, parents playing with children, 13% of the total, right? Of the sample of New Zealanders in this study, 1/3 are parents. So how about connecting further through video games, like staying connected with family and friends, meeting somebody you wouldn't otherwise meet? Look at those numbers. Almost 1 in 4 have met somebody, fresh, new, introduction through video games that they feel they wouldn't have otherwise met. All right, met a good friend, spouse, or significant other. The number of times I've been at events talking to people about video games, and they say, oh, I met my husband through World of Warcraft. Remember that? Right? So people are meeting online, and they're engaging with one another. Now, there are many other pages in this report, a lot of them around attitudes and knowledge about classification, knowledge about the role of video games and assumptions about how they work in daily life for New Zealanders. You'll be happy that I'm not going to go through all of them. But I just wanted to point out that we see ourselves in video games, and I did a study way back in the early noughties where I looked at all the things that are in video games. And at the time, so this is right around 2000, there were more robots than women in video games. Right? How times have changed. And New Zealanders say they would like to see a range of diversity as a way of opening up conversations that perhaps we're not having about our incredible diversity. There's a really positive and generally dominant opinion that video games can provide an opening for more conversations about diversity. And we know that when we work together and play together, we often come together regardless of our differences. So I think that's really interesting. This is the most important graph in the report, in my opinion, because it says a lot about the nature of video game play in New Zealand today. There's a lot to unpack here. This is the different age groups. This is minutes per day that they're playing. We break it down, the little dotted lines at the bottom. So if you go to the far right, casual play, which is defined as playing games for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time and playing multiple times a day. So we find out how often is a typical casual play session, how many times a day, multiply those numbers to get minutes. So this is an approximation. And then we also ask that for, so you see females and males identified. You would have noticed that non-binary, people who identify as non-binary was less than 1%. So obviously there's not enough here to work with for that graph. We have females and males in-depth play. So the light blue and the purple, they're the dashed lines. And then the solid lines are total play. There's some surprising outcomes in this, don't you think? If you look at that gold or amber line, they're women. Women's total play. And how much do women in their 60s play? Close to 1 hour and 3/4 a day. A lot of casual play, right? But also quite a lot of in-depth play. So sitting and playing for quite a long time. See the dip there? Social researchers have known for years that people at this age get into that sort of sandwich generation, older parents, older kids, life is really intense, there's a lot going on. I certainly have that in my life at the moment. We tend to be the least happy when we're those ages. So basically you're happiest when you're a kid, and then you get into early adulthood and it slides. Right? Because you're working and trying to pay the bills and cope with life. And then you get to the other side and go, oh, thank God, that's over. And you get happy again. But video games actually can help perhaps ameliorate some of that. But you do see that people are sandwiched and pressed. And so they're not playing as much at those ages. But look at little girls. Now, this is a small bit of a sample. In Australia, we noticed that girls between the ages of 5 and 14 were playing more than boys. Okay, still small numbers, relatively speaking, but a real indication. And we've seen this dominance of older women playing for the last 4 times that we've done this study in New Zealand. And the first time we observed it, we thought, that's interesting. Can it really be true? But now that we've seen it so many times, we think we're observing reality in New Zealand. How about where people play in the times of day? We know that there is a stereotype of people being antisocial and playing at odd hours, and certainly we see some of that here, but we also see a lot of normality. Look at all the different places people play. Not as much at school. Every parent and teacher is very happy about this, but maybe that's just where games are being played for school. but people playing at work during downtime, playing in public transport, playing while we're waiting for an appointment, and of course playing in different parts of the home. Number one place to play video games, great big jolly surprise, it's the lounge room. But we've documented it and we can see that. Also the bedroom, and that depends, as I'm going to show you, on age groups. So also, when do we play? Evening, night, afternoon, morning. I've talked to people about playing in the morning. I think it's tough to do before work, but if it gets you going, fantastic, right? But most people, because games are for fun and to relax and de-stress, play towards the end of the day and at night. All right. How about genres? So we know that puzzle games used to be towards the bottom of the charts, and arcade games and platformers used to be at the top of the charts when we started this research. But look at the flip now. In New Zealand, and I think this is really quite powerful, we're talking about games for the brain. We're talking about games that are puzzles, action adventures, and board and card games, followed by strategy games and shooters. So the top 5. These are games that require a lot of active cognitive investment and attention. And before we wrap up, let me just provide 3 profiles of 3 age groups. So we don't have a lot of details about all members of the household. We just know that for all members of New Zealand households, their age, their gender, and whether or not they play, right, and who they play with. So what we know about all of the adults who responded to the survey is this. So if you are between the ages of 18 and 34, and I'll call that early working life and uni life and so on. So you're onboarding to basically being a working age adult. 94% of males in this category play video games compared to 81% of females. On average, in this age group, 88% play. All of them, 100% say, if we give them the choices, reasons you play, all of them say one of the reasons is to have fun, followed by to pass time and to relax and de-stress. So they're what I would call the golden 3 reasons we use any medium, right? We play action-adventure games in this group, we play shooters, and we play online multiplayer games, right? That all squares with my worldview about age and different genres of video games in New Zealand. 24% of this age group say they've made friends through games, so 1 in 4. 20% stay connected with family and friends, and 14%, right, have met someone they wouldn't have otherwise met through games. That's powerful. Playing socially is a big part of this age group's experience for video games. The top 3 results in this category: playing with a friend, playing with my partner, and playing with a sibling. Again, this squares with my worldview. Preferred devices, mobile phones, computers, and consoles. That is actually a distinctively New Zealand figure. In other parts of the world, consoles typically are number 2. But it's powerful that through the pandemic, we've seen more and more people pick up devices and play, and we'll get to that when we get to the 65 plus group. So preferred location, for preferred time and place, playing in the evening, playing at night. This is a dominant one for that group. More bedrooms than lounge rooms, given the age group, and probably don't own a home yet, many of them. So that makes some sense to me. Let's compare this age group with the 35 to 64-year-old age group. All right, for them, check this out. 74% of males play, 81% of females, 78% overall in this age group. So more females playing than males at this age group. It could have all sorts of implications and suggestions around work. 99% to have fun, 98% to pass time, 97% to relax and de-stress. All the golden 3, playing puzzles, board, and action adventures. See the shift there? We're starting to move towards a lot more, less Twitch-dependent games that require really fast response times. You just can't compete with somebody who can press a key faster than you. Right? And then 21% stay connected with friends, making friends and meeting somebody they wouldn't otherwise have met. But now look at this bottom corner, and I think this is where the story and the real takeaway from today's results is critical. And if you develop games, I think this is starting to become an opportunity which I'll dwell on. We now have roughly a quarter, certainly more than the 21% I said before, playing only solo. 27% are playing solo. So they're starting to withdraw from social play. Partners, 23%, children, 22%. So they're in the middle of the family ecology. And so we've got as many people playing solo as either of these two, but you blend these two together and 50% nearly are playing socially. Of course, we know that if 27% are playing alone, then 73% are playing socially overall. But a really powerful direction that we'll talk about. Mobile phones, computers, and consoles still dominant, but look at how powerful mobile phones are. And during the pandemic, through building up skills and building up more technology base, we know that more people have devices on which to play video games. Playing more in the evening, less overnight, more work commitments, and so on. And now playing in the lounge room because maybe we own our own home. Fantastic. Let's go to the last group and round out the conversation. So 67% of males play, 64% overall in that age group, as we said earlier, and 61% of women play. Women are playing more, but fewer of them are playing, just to be clear. All right? So that is an interesting figure that tells us that these men have an origin story in games, and they've been playing for quite a long time. Women are relatively new to games in that sense. 43% are playing puzzle games, 31% board games, and 14% strategy games. Those numbers jump up because they're the genres that they're familiar with. 13% stay connected to family and friends, 6% met someone they wouldn't have otherwise met, and 6% made friends. Those numbers have declined because there's less social play, and here's the most important story of the day. If you are over the age of 65 in New Zealand, and you play video games, you're much more likely to be playing them alone. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. You should be playing games socially because the opportunity is there. Everyone else is, as we've established, if only 1 in 5 across the population are playing solo, but in this group, it's basically 3 out of 4 playing solo, then that's a problem. And so here's an opportunity, I think, for socialization around games and also for more in-game affordances around puzzle games, board and card games, which we know have social elements to them. But remember also, if we've had more people in this age group on ramp since the pandemic, then they probably don't feel quite as comfortable and are holding back a little bit because they don't feel that they have the literacy or the skills to compete against other players. Not true, we know, because you can on-ramp socially at many different levels, and games are really great for that. In fact, they're built for it, but they don't know that yet. They're playing with grandchildren, playing with a partner, or playing alone. They're playing on mobiles, they're playing on computers, and very few playing on consoles, and they're playing mostly in the evening and playing in the lounge room. All right, so what we've just done is we've talked about the complexity of video game play in New Zealand. We've talked about a lot of numbers. There are many other stats, particularly around attitudes. The number one takeaway around all those slides I didn't show you is that New Zealanders are remarkably positive about the role of video games for aging, for living life and being healthy, for schools, for work. One of the stats, very few New Zealanders play video games as part of workplace training. They exist out there, this is a thing, but most employers aren't using the affordances of interactive technology for educating and training workers. However, New Zealanders are saying, actually in the majority, yeah, look, if my employer offered a video game with which to train about workplace rules and regulations and safety and so on, I'd play it. And how many would say that they are just keen to do professional development around workplace health and safety? So if we built that into games more, there would be tremendous opportunities there. But we've talked about the complexity and the diversity of video game players. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a moving space. But the one takeaway before we turn out to questions is that in large, New Zealanders play video games and in large numbers. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions. I'm sure you might have questions about the methodology or perhaps about some of the intersection of the different technologies. So James is going to grab, and thank you, James, for perfect miking. Grab a microphone and we'll ask questions. And by the way, thank you very much for coming. It's hard to compete against Unity and other development tools that are on offer. G'day.
Hello again. So I came to see you in Brisbane when you gave the presentation there for Australia. And I asked the question about how Australia's piss poor internet infrastructure affected the survey results compared to New Zealand's, which we're certainly always told is so much better. Do you think that plays into the results here at all?
Yeah, sure. That's a brilliant question. And of course, the internet in Wellington in particular is just gobsmackingly good. And you only really know that if you live on the Gold Coast. So online multiplayer games and online role-playing games make a much bigger appearance in New Zealand than they do in Australia. And I think that's the takeaway, right? If I were a developer, I'd be very happy being in New Zealand. I'd be a bit more frustrated being in certain parts of Australia, particularly southeast Queensland. And so I think what we're seeing here, and we used to ask a question around whether or not you're happy with your broadband and so on. I think by and large, it has improved over there. But I think it's really important for New Zealanders who have access to the quality of broadband you have to recognize that, and I love the term weightless exports, right, that New Zealand, invented. This idea that you can build, and you can build effectively, and through a pandemic, during lockdowns, you can get throughput without the kind of bottlenecks that you see in many parts of the world, is a real bonus economically. And then in terms of game literacy, I think just being online is really critical. And the reason I think we've seen a jump from 73% of New Zealanders playing video games to 79% is that 6% is the elastic that we got out of the pandemic. There's always a saying, don't waste a good crisis, and you don't really want to wish a pandemic on the planet again. But if we're going to have one, it's better to have one if you've got broadband, would be my point.
Kia ora, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time putting the report together and walking through it. Really love it. One question I had, and I look forward to going deeper into the report, do you ask people where they get their games from or where they find out about games, whether it's through social media, through app stores? Is there any information like that in the report?
Thanks very much. You said Kevin? Carl. Sorry, Carl. It's age sharing. So we used to ask about boxes, downloads, streaming, services. We haven't done that this time, simply because I know that, and it's probably a question really for Ron and IGEA. They would have quite a bit of point of sale data, of course, and of course, different publishers and self-publishers would have point of sale data. But what we do know is that there has been this huge shift to app stores, downloads, box product, is still, I wouldn't call it evergreen, but I think it will actually have a bit of a resurgence because we see, for example, in the music business, with all the high definition streaming and all the joy we get out of getting access to literally millions of songs, same thing in video games. We now, instead of having whatever, let's call it generously back in the day, 200 products available to us locally from a retail store, we now have tens of thousands. That shift also explains, I think, the growth of video games as a medium because it's democratized content. There's a lot more content for a lot more taste, or many different tastes, and it's easily accessible, and it's not terribly expensive. But if you're talking about a AAA title that gives you literally hundreds of hours of play, of course, that's a bit pricier, and it should be. But by and large, I expect to see, like in the audio world, that box product will come back because there's all the ancillary stuff. People love maps. They love tactility. They love, remarkably, they love loading discs and putting, for example, in audio world, putting vinyl on a platter, who knew? And I think the games, like all media, will go through that cycle. But the answer to your question is we don't have the data here, but I am well aware that most people find out about games through app stores and download services, and there are many of those, of course. Thanks, Carl.
Hi, my name's Sebastian. I'll ask the question about how the sample of households were actually selected and contacted, and if there was an element of self-selection in that at all.
That's awesome. Sebastian, you said?
Yes.
Thanks, Sebastian. So thanks for asking the question. So we'll just sit back, relax. I love this stuff. Ron always gets upset when I start talking about methodology. We're not upset, but she's like, oh God, this guy can go forever. All right, so this is a panel. We've always done them as panel studies. So we get an organization called Qualtrics, which is it's a survey tool. It's a web-based survey tool. And they actually organize panels through panel providers. These are qualified households in New Zealand who have agreed to be part of research. They do not have to be, in the first instance, internet savvy, but we know with penetration of internet in New Zealand, that's not a problem, and it will not skew the sample in terms of demographics, right? We then ask for them to provide us with gender equality. So we don't know how women and men are going to talk about what we do because we've done this for many years, but we wouldn't presume that we would get nearly 50% of all video game players in New Zealand being female. But what we do ask is that, well, the New Zealand population is slightly more female than male. It's almost 51%. So we want that equal proportion in the sample of the 800 households, right? We also want representation by age. So we stratify by age and we stratify by region, to make sure that we cover all of New Zealand, and we do so proportionately. So and it's a very expensive operation to do this. We actually ask for these pinpoint subsamples to make sure that they're in the study. When we reach saturation with one, so we've got enough women or enough men or enough people over the age of 60, then we stop sampling them until we're done. It only in New Zealand, the response rate is high and very quick. So within a week, we're done sampling 800 households. It's amazing. And we use a tool, as I said, called Qualtrics, which is very accessible. You can complete the survey on your mobile phone or on a laptop. And one of the things that we do when we get the data from Qualtrics is we check it very carefully to make sure that we have mapped to the New Zealand population. Because all it would take, and this is a thing in survey research, right? More women than men are likely to respond to a survey. Men just don't communicate, we know that. So that was meant to be a joke, but I'll just, whatever. Self-deprecating humor. And older men in particular, not good at all. So we make sure that we don't, oversample, and that could be a real problem. So if we did, it would skew everything. Similarly, if we know that roughly 1/3 of adults who would respond to a survey in New Zealand are parents. Okay, so because we know that, we just double check that is the case when we get the data. And we also do another thing which is really critical. We look for mistakes or out-of-bound responses to make sure that there's no error in the way we've asked the question. And sometimes, and I showed you, and I did that on purpose actually to show you that we can make mistakes in research and call it out. I should not have compressed the different media categories. So we used to ask about streaming TV, free-to-air TV, streaming movies, free-to-air or free-to-air movies or movies on free-to-air TV, and so on. We combined all of those, and it created flat. So that was a mistake. We're always trying different things with the research as well to check the robustness of the process. But the one thing that we've done over time is we've always used a panel design. We've always asked the same question about how you play, do you play video games? The question is, do you play video games or electronic games of any kind on any screen, whether it be a computer, a smartphone, just list them all, and including games such as Words with Friends, Wordle, pickpockets games, all of that. So we make sure we actually list all, a whole range to make sure that people go, yeah, I've done that. If they say, yeah, I've done that, they play video games, don't they? I think that's fair. It's just like, I may not go to the theater this year, but I watch movies. Am I a movie goer? Well, as long as I've gone to the movies, sometime in my life, I've probably been a movie goer. Probably if I don't do it ever, if I've only done it ever once, I'd say, no, you don't count. So we just look at that, and we look at the numbers really, really carefully so that we make sure that we're not overinflating. One more thing. So when we ask the questions about all the different ways we play and the amount of time we spend playing, we ask the adults to tell us about themselves and one other person in the house who plays video games. Because we can't ask, so we ask about all the people in the household, tell us about all the people, what is their gender identity, how old are they, do they play video games, so we know all of that. And I think this is one of the most robust things you can do. We take those individuals in the households and we flip them to create cases. So every single one of those is a valid person in the survey. So we're not just talking to the people who answer the survey online, because they're probably more likely than somebody in the household who isn't answering the survey online to play video games. So we ask about everybody, first of all, and then for the top 2 people, the person who responds to the survey and one other person who plays video games, we ask all the questions about how long, how frequently, and all of that. It's very hard, of course, to ask opinion questions of people who aren't answering the survey, so we only ask all the opinion questions of the people responding. We don't ask, what do you think your son or daughter's opinion is? So thanks for the question. It's really great. Did I answer that adequately? Yeah, look, I think it is robust, and it's, as I said, it's not cheap. It's very expensive. I mean, the real cost in producing this research is getting access to a really good sample. Yeah. Thanks for that. Awesome. Other questions? Hi.
Thank you so much for providing these insights. They're absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and thanks for coming. Yeah.
I had a question about a kind of a general, I guess, marketing stereotype about who plays what kinds of games.
Yeah.
I think there's a general stereotype in games marketing that women will play more puzzle games, more casual type genres, as opposed to males who play more action-adventure games. I was wondering if you have a breakdown of female and male kind of play averages across genres, whether this kind of stereotype holds or whether it has evolved.
That's a great question. What's your name?
Sophia.
Sophia?
Yeah.
Sophia, thank you very much for the question, and again, thanks for coming. It makes a difference to have you all here and to be able to share the story, because obviously I'm really excited about this. We do actually measure that. We haven't put it in the report because it becomes hundreds of pages. So we have enough data actually to produce probably a 150-page report instead of a 50-page report. So we don't. It's just too hard to report everything. We also, as I said earlier, I can tell you that 54% of Maori households, have parents in responding to the survey, which is really cool. So we have all of that information. We break it down. I do have the information. I can tell you what I know or what I remember from the data. So there are a couple of surprises. You're absolutely right that fewer women play first-person shooters than men. Okay, we know that. We also know that there isn't a big difference between gender for things like puzzle games, actually. That tends to track fairly evenly for men and women, especially as we age, but then puzzle games become more popular as we age. So age is a much more potent predictor than gender, generally speaking, around genre. Actually, French gender. That's funny. So we know that. But in terms of females and males for things like action-adventure, there's not much in it. Actually, there's been a real growth in women playing action-adventure games. And I think over the years that I've seen, and I think that's fascinating, and I think that's because these are, and we see this in some of the quotes, right, that I showed you. We see people really loving the free travel, these diverse worlds, and we know that women really enjoy those genres as well. I would also point out there's a lot more content now for women than there was 10 years ago even. And that content is around attracting women to play things like action-adventure games. And so many of them, parking Zelda, an evergreen one, to one side, there is a lot more that I think attracts women. I know look, I'm an Elder Scrolls guy, and Skyrim is one of my favorite games of all time. The number of women I know who play Skyrim is just mind-blowing. So, in fact, and they're always better than I am. Just always the way. So yeah, does that answer your question? So I don't have it in the report, but what I can say is, sport games. So sport games are very popular with men compared to women, generally speaking. But I think in Australia, just at the moment, sports, particularly FIFA, is really popular with girls. Right? So it's really interesting to watch these fluctuations. The other game there, so we talked about puzzles, board games. So board and card games are really, they just skew to age, and a lot of men playing those. Thank you, Sophia.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for presenting this comprehensive report. It's fascinating, I'm sure we'll all agree. I'm very interested that 36% of the respondents within the context of this said they made new friends playing through video games. I wonder if you could tell us, if you could, how a little bit of granularity into the avenues those people are actually meeting these new friends.
Yes. Right, so we haven't reported it here because we've simplified the question, but I can tell you from previous reports where we've actually asked these kinds of questions. A lot of people meet people online. They often meet people through leaderboards. They also meet people from playing in situ in games, depending on the genre of the game. But there is a large proportion of New Zealanders who have told us over time that they also meet people in person at various game events, or friends who bring a friend over and they actually bond through the game. Or through gameplay. Two blokes, they haven't met each other, they play a sports game together, and then they get more, become friends, that sort of thing. We also know that there are a lot of opportunities for talking about games online. And so people who often go to, and we've got a whole set of questions on those pages I didn't show you around some of the social activities people engage in around games and game culture. So things like, really big, what do you call them, like expos, where you can actually go around and play different products and so on, and you meet people in those environments, you compete against them. It used to be, in the old days, LAN parties, but now esports is a really popular place where people meet and become friends, both esports through online attendance and esports in-person attendance, not to mention, of course, competition. So, there's a lot of granularity there, actually, as you said. Great. So, what's your name again?
William.
William, thanks, William. Really great question. And we have drilled down on that in the past. I should have said around the methodology, William, that we have over 300 measures here, so it's a lot. And it takes the typical person about 15 minutes to complete the survey, so it's not a terribly lightweight experience for them. So we have shrunk it down, and I wish I could give you more granularity for this year. But does that give you some indication of the...
It absolutely does. Thank you very much.
The background? Yeah, thanks for that. I probably could, I'll reflect on it, and if you want to take it offline, I can give you the past reports. Hi, thanks.
Hi, thanks so much. That was really great. You spoke a lot about the joy and connection and well-being that was created through gaming, and thanks for showing us those direct quotes. That was great. But I was wondering, what are some of the themes that came out, if they did, around negative things?
That's a great question.
And as a follow-up to that, did you find any correlation between the number of gaming devices in household and what they might be reporting around well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I haven't, and I could, correlate the well-being questions around game devices. Again, it's like, how long is a piece of string?
Right.
And actually, more precisely, Raylene, I think, Ron, this would be fair to say, Raylene would say, okay, look, can you just get us the report? Because we kind of need to, share the report. We can drill down, and we do often. We go back and look at the numbers, and we're also around the quotes, by the way, there is a timeline, there's a time series for New Zealand around the quotes that we're looking at doing, which would take us back to 2010 and move us forward. I think it'd be a fascinating journey. With respect to, so I don't have that, but I could certainly provide that if you want that. It wouldn't be hard to do. In terms of the negatives, right? So you saw that at the very beginning, one of the reasons I set out to do this research is, and I approached IGEA I was doing work for the Australian Broadcasting Authority and the Classification Board, and I said to IGEA, there just are no numbers around demographics, and who else is going to do this if you don't do it? So to their credit, for many years now, IGEA has supported the research to make sure we get there. One of the things I said is, so my PhD is on how boys' and counter-stereotype portrayal of men changes the male journey. I'm one of the few people who've done that. In psychology, it was all about girls and women. Fair enough. Especially the way the media portrayed them, as I said before, more robots than women in games back in the day. But I always look for the sort of the delta, the difference. And one of the things that we weren't seeing is people talking about what are the possible benefits around games. So I don't ask a lot of the questions, as you would imagine, around, well, do games, make you feel frustrated with life? Well, I don't ask that question. What I do ask is some of the ways you could get benefit or not from games. And let me give you the big example, which I think is so I'm glad you asked the question. Sorry, what's your name again?
Betta.
Betta? Thank you, Betta. is around physicality. How many of you played on Wii Fit? How many of you still play on Wii Fit? Oh, so maybe 2 of us, right? And how about like Wii Sports, remember that? How about Xbox Connect, right? Right. So the and okay, here we go, bald guy. DDR? Yes. Okay, so the physicality of games is very real. The most recent example of physicality in games is Pokemon Go. Fantastic, thank goodness for that. But have you noticed how, as we move to our phones, we're more or less physical with games? And there aren't a lot of products out there at the moment that allow us to move like mad. And I love dancing, and I love DDR, and I thought that was a really great use of games. So was Guitar Hero, right? Because you can move around. When I ask New Zealanders about the value of games for balance, for fitness, for, what was the other one? Arthritis, because those questions are in the survey. They go, nah, terrible. Games aren't good for that. And the reason they're not good for that is because we're not moving in games. Again, another opportunity. In addition to getting older adults in particular, but kids as well, playing socially, let's get them playing physically. Because after all, if we love sport, if we love music, if we love moving around, which we do, I mean, we're bipedal walkers with an opposing thumb, we should be going for it. And so that is probably one of the negatives. So let's make more product that help us move.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. But there is a real positive psychology in games, and I think that's really critical. There's one over here, James. Oh, yeah, okay, good. Speaking of the physicality of games.
Yes. I happened to notice that there was no mention of virtual reality in your presentation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if that did come up, if it didn't come up, if it's, I know it's still a very small market segment, especially compared to mobile. Just curious if there's any mention or things that came out of that.
Thank you. What's your name?
Oh, Sam.
Sam?
Another expat American.
Thank you very much. So the answer is yes, it is in the report. The reason I didn't discuss it is, as you said, you answered your question, there isn't a lot of it just at the moment. I think what's really interesting with Meta and Apple and some of what's happening in the space, we're going to see a real pickup. We've got it. When we see the pickup, we will expand around it because we'll ask more questions. We have asked more questions with past reports. So if you go back to Digital New Zealand 22 and Digital New Zealand 20, we used to use even years, even though we did the research in odd years because we figured, well, I figured that, that you will be talking about the data for more than a year. We have a lot more in those 2 studies around virtual reality, but what you see is it's a really small proportion of the sample. We're talking less than 5%. Yeah. So I think it got up in New Zealand to like 6% the last time, or the 2 times ago when we did the study. What I'm looking forward to is as Meta and Apple really come on stream, and perhaps some of the consoles come back to proprioception and head-mounted displays and so on. I mean, Sony is a really good example here. I think Sony is still sort of in its infancy, and I would like to see that grow. We're going to have more conversations because there's no question, if we think about action-adventure games as an example, people want to go into amazing worlds, and virtual reality will help them get there. I'm not sure I want to wear a headset moving around. We're going to talk about motion games, but I think augmented reality, 100%. Let's do this. And I think that's where Apple's approach may be really interesting. So, yep. Sorry.
Hi, Sebastian again.
Sebastian.
I'm glad virtual reality came up because when you were talking about DDR and other movement games, my favorite is Beat Saber, and that was how I did a lot of my physical exercise when we were in the lockdown. It's quite funny. But I've got a couple of related questions. The first is, you've mentioned, people have asked about a few correlations that you say you can get out of the data set. Do you make the data publicly available so other people can access that and do their own analyses?
Yep. So I'm absolutely happy to provide you. So I use the statistical package for the social sciences. I think we're in version 28 now. I'm happy to give you the tables out of that with the ends and that sort of thing. I won't give you the table of data, and the reason I won't is that I have to then give you, of course, all of the questions in the way that I ask them, and I have to show you the structure of the of the back end, and that's a commercial tool. I mean, I've thought about, when do I not do this research anymore after so many years of doing it? And this is a story for you. I keep thinking there's nothing left to talk about, in terms of audience playing video games. You saw that, if you look across the ages, it's pretty flat. Everybody's playing. Well, 80% of everybody is playing. So how's that going to grow? Surely that's going to flatten out. But it keeps growing. And we keep seeing new things. I think the social story for over 65s is huge. So I keep finding new things. Finding the, that women over the age of 50 are playing more than men was a huge, huge finding. And to show it year on year is really critical. So going back to answering your question about the data, I keep thinking we're going to do another one of these. And I don't want someone to take it away from me, to be honest. And we do ask the question. So I'm happy to show you how we ask, key questions so that you can understand and unpack. So a lot of the attitude questions, just as an example, ask, to what extent do you agree with the following statement? Video games are good for mental health, good for, overcoming problems with arthritis and so on. So we ask all of that, and it's basically strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree. So it's a Likert scale, Rensis-Likert, and strongly agree and strongly agree. And then we take the top two, and that's your positive, right? Versus the small percentage over here that typically is negative around those questions. So I'm happy to share those things with you, but I would hate to give you the whole, the store.
I understand.
Yeah. But I am happy, if you're really concerned, especially around the numbers, and you want me to do a proof of working out, I'm happy to do that for you. Absolutely.
I had one more question, which was, it was mentioned vaguely, but I'm wondering if you did any questions about serious games, games for training and education, and if there's been a trend around that over the years, especially, because from my perspective, it seems like they're getting a bit more penetrative, but they're not quite there yet. What would be your take on that?
So we did reduce the number of questions around serious games, Sebastian, so thanks for that. But we, in the past two reports, we had a lot more around serious games, games for work, games for learning, different types of learning, games in schools, games for training, games for mental health, So we've asked specifically around those in the past two studies. Again, we kind of pulled it back, and we were having this conversation about, well, are we having enough are we saying enough about games for joy, games for fun, games for play? And we thought we were probably starting to get away from what they really are in some ways. Having said that, I agree with you completely. As I said, more than half of New Zealanders want to play serious games for workplace training, but less than a quarter are getting them at work. So there's a real delta. Thanks very much, Sebastian. Back there.
Kia ora, my name's Victoria. Thanks for your presentation, really enjoyed it, and your research is amazing. I noticed the information about people being interested in diversity in there. Is there anything about people enjoying either seeing themselves represented? Have you got any information about that?
That's a great question, Victoria. We don't, actually. There is some really good research I can point you to around choice of avatar identity versus personal identity. Is that your question? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, and whether people enjoy it more if they can create themselves in there, or whether they prefer to be somebody else.
Awesome. So there are really, really good studies, particularly out of Europe, around choosing an avatar, choosing a character, and the joy of building a character, and also studies around loss of the character. If you lose access to the game, for example, you stop playing it, you go back to play it, and you realize all the data are gone. And thank God for the cloud, right? So we have more persistence of our characters now, as long as we keep our accounts or come back to our accounts. But there is a huge bit of, I think there's a really good bit of research around attachment to character, loss from character, investment in character and investment in a game. So I know, for example, my own experience creating avatars in games like Elder Scrolls games like Skyrim. There's a lot of joy in that, especially when I can have hair. Just saying, but people do that, and they pick their there's some stuff around archetypal characters, for example, and people choosing heroes versus villains and so on. That's fascinating work, and it's in the field, obviously, of psychology and social psychology. Afterwards, I can give you my card and I'll point you to that.
Thank you. And is there any indication in the work you've done about whether playing games is inspiring people to become creators of games or creative generally?
Yeah, that's a great question as well, Victoria. And we still ask that question. Sorry, in this one we didn't. In 22, we asked, are you planning or are you studying to work in the games industry? And as you can expect, that would be a small percentage. It's like, much less than 10%. I can't remember the exact number, but let's call it between 4 and 6, and it'd probably be about right. So a lot of people would like to get in the industry, especially kids who play games quite a bit and become passionate about the form. And they do, as you know, many metaverses now allow people to build games inside the metaverse. So you can build inside Roblox, you can build inside Minecraft, you can do all kinds of things in games now that you weren't able to do before. And I know that a lot of kids who experience that maker approach to game interaction would develop an interest in making games.
And are there parents who are playing with them more supportive of them being in the gaming industry because of any of that?
Yeah, I can't answer the question from my data, but I could extrapolate from a number of conversations and some quotes in the studies, not just this iteration, but previous iterations, not just in New Zealand, but also in Australia. And I can tell you that parents' attitudes towards games have shifted enormously. And I think that's because parents themselves are playing and they get it. And I keep saying, and I've had this conversation, with ministers and with policy advisors, with teachers and parents. Literacy is not just something that happens in a book. Literacy is something that happens with film and television and music. And to have an ear for types of music is really critical, or instruments. Same thing with games. To have an eye and to have the necessary coordination and skill set to work inside the game mechanic, or to progress through a story, especially if it's more of a free rather than on rails type of story. It requires a high level of literacy, and you build that literacy over time. And parents are getting that. And we've asked questions in the past about that and parents spending time. In fact, we do have a question in this study now about parents saying to what extent, we asked them, to what extent do you use games to teach your kids? And it's pretty high. I don't know the exact number, but it's right up there. It's in the vast majority of parents are taking learning opportunities out of games.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Victoria. Great questions. It's fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. They're really stimulating, so thank you so much.
Hey, I was just sorry, I'm not good with words. You have a few quotes that come up, but a lot of your questions aren't
open-ended.
Yeah. Have you thought about doing more qualitative research and a little bit more?
That's a great question. What's your name?
Nina.
So actually and I probably haven't done, Nina, to be fair, I haven't done a very good job today of sort of showing you the diversity of qualitative data that we have and the depth. So we have variously asked 2 or 3 questions in the surveys that are open-ended as opposed to closed. Look, I'll tell you, I'm a multi-methodologist. I think quantitative and qualitative research are not only equal partners in developing our empirical knowledge, but they are co-equal partners. And so more of that is there, but it's a lot harder in this forum. And I think to just start those simple conversations around games, to use the quotes and get a real sense of it, as opposed to if I hit you, look, if you're a policymaker and I say 79% of New Zealanders play games, Kiwis play games, the vast majority, that's like, okay, we've got to think about this. Right? Or that there isn't enough broadband available to make games as enjoyable as we'd like them to be. That's an important policy question. Or that a percentage of a parent, particularly if you're a parent of a small kid, classification matters to you. If you're a parent of an older kid or you're an adult, you don't care about classification, to be frank, because you're your own driver. Those stats are powerful policy indicators. The quotes add all the gravity and the depth and the validity of the numbers for the conversation. And so there's a ton. So if I go back through the report, you go, please don't. But there are, every page, there are quotes. Almost every page has quotes. And we've actually got a grouping of them as well in the report. So absolutely download the report from igea.net and just go through those. And as I said, we're trying to find a space. My day job is quite diverse and impacted at the moment by administration, but I love digging in. And so Patrice, our co-author on this, is a qualitative researcher. She did all the quotes, did an amazing job, really finding a lot of diversity in the quotes. And we're talking about the way we might be able to pull those together into an entity unto themselves. Awesome question. Thanks. Hi, kia ora.
Hi. Is that working?
Your research, oh, thank you. I tend to look at serious games and the Maori population in New Zealand. So
Right.
if I have a look in, are the numbers large enough? Because I do cover Northland, which I'm not sure there'll be 100% playing games if I heard you correctly.
Yeah. Look, I think that's fair. Of the 148, adults who responded to the survey, 147 said, they're playing games. So I thought that was, it's pretty, it's pretty high. From the Maori population or subpopulation. I think that we do have the serious game question, but it's not like we used to. So I could certainly give you the intersection between those two. So just offline, it won't take me long at all. Yep. Having said that, I don't want to sort of walk away and have all this homework to do I? Because when I get back to the office on Monday, it's our orientation week, and I'm going to be full tilt as a dean. Hi.
No, let's finish. Okay. Historically, big tech companies outside of New Zealand have identified New Zealand as a popular place to test new technologies or releases. And anecdotally, it's kind of been represented as because New Zealand has a high geographic and demographic diversity.
Yeah.
If that does hold in your experience with this data, I'm just curious the implications for that if you were to extrapolate the data from New Zealand to the wider games industry.
Yeah, great question. What's your name?
Josh.
John?
Josh.
Josh, sorry. Even Tesla tests their vehicles here. So there's that sort of, I think you're right, New Zealand is a test ground, particularly for intellectual property, forget the cars, for games, for other media, and of course is a tremendous supplier of cultural capital to the world. So I think we should just call that out and be really proud of that. And I think you could argue that as a diverse nation with a lot of geographic, topographical diversity and a really healthy liberal democracy, it's probably one of the best places to test content for things like offense, for things like resonance and stickiness. How much would people stick with something? If you're developing a new title, I think New Zealand would tell you. And if there would be a resistance to some types of content, I think that would come out here as well. And the reason I think that, and you can correct me because you know better than I do, I sit, sort of with the bird's eye view, but I see New Zealand as being a remarkably multifaceted nation that offers a lot of granularity to go into different sort of values and perspectives. I think you could pick up a lot. And I imagine that's why product testers, including beta testing for games, happens here. I think it's also why the tech industry, because you mentioned big tech has had a huge interest in New Zealand for some time. And I think part of that is because you have not only cultural capital, but you also have intellectual capacity and engineering now. So I think there's a real interest in that. Does that?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that. How am I going for time? Oh yeah, we've got less than 10 minutes. Good. Not good that we have less than 10 minutes. Good that we're inside the time. Sorry. That's why I'm not a politician. Other questions? All right, let's draw a line. Oh, Josh has one more.
Sorry.
Great, thanks.
Just one other question. As a multiplayer game developer, I noted that you have called out specifically like gamers that play in couples or gamers that play with their friends.
Yeah.
Did you collect a lot of data around the size of groups that people tend to play in?
No, I have no idea. That's brilliant. No, I haven't asked about sort of those large, other than esports, and people going to things like expos and game conventions, and we've asked questions over the years about engagement, and we've got quite a few in here around engagement with game culture, including things like cosplay and that sort of thing. We don't have a clear indication, but I think we could draw a fairly long bow around those people who say that they're engaged with all these different types of game culture. They would probably be in fairly big concentrations of other friends and people who play video games because they're obviously very social in that space. But you're right, it would be fascinating to know of people who play socially, which is the vast majority here. I think most are playing in dyads, triads, and quads. And I mean, after all, go back to the consoles with the 4 plugs in the front. That's just kind of the way it probably tends to work. And there's a whole body of knowledge around small group and small group communication. And I think playing video games, except for in massively multiplayer open worlds, it's really hard to have a lot of players. So it's probably very small groupings. Certainly small groupings is the norm. Yeah, thanks very much, Josh. Awesome. All right. Ron, I might ask you to close, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff said, he'll be outside afterwards, so if you have any questions, just to continue the conversation, just grab him. The other parts of the IGA team, Ben and Sarah and myself, will be hanging around for a while. Just a couple of thank yous. A big thank you to the team from NZGDA, who have been fabulous partners over a lot of years. Joy, Chelsea, I thought I saw Stephen here. Thank you very much for supporting us and letting us work with you. Thank you for the weightless export quote that we use continually and never give you any credit for. Thank you for attending. The big thank you is to the IGA board and our members, because this data, as Jeff said, he is not inexpensive. The data is expensive, Jeff is cheap.
There you go. That's a quote.
That's a quote. But it's something that our board, every second year when we put in a budget to do this presentation, do the research, never gets one moment of argument. It's an essential part of what we do. In New Zealand, we've been doing it since we came to New Zealand. It's incredibly important. So thank you to our members, because it's your contribution, and there's a number of members in the room, it's your contribution that pays for this research. So thank you very much for trusting us, the IGA team, to bring it to life. Enjoyed the rest of the conference. We're looking forward to hanging around, and enjoy both days, today and tomorrow. Thanks very much.